Fear. You know the feeling. Sometimes it's a little worry, other times it's this huge, deep-seated anxiety. But what if we could do more than just put up with it? What if we could actually build a mental toolkit to face it head-on, understand it, and maybe even grow from it? Well, today, we're going to do just that. Let's dive in and look at some real, practical strategies from science, philosophy, and just plain old shared human experience.
So let's start with something kind of specific, maybe even a little funny. This fear, shared online, is way more common than you'd think. I mean, picture it. Those giant mascots at a sports game, or maybe some creepy character at a theme park. It's a perfect example of a phobia, an intense, very specific fear.
But of course, fears run so much deeper than that. This confession from another person online is just profound. It's an anxiety about the future, about losing a huge part of yourself. It's a fear that's completely tangled up in uncertainty and losing control over your own life.
And then there's this kind of fear, the fear of losing someone you love. This comes from a military spouse, and wow, you can just feel that heart-wrenching anxiety. It's tied to huge world events that are completely 100% out of our control. The helplessness is just right there. So you see the spectrum, right? From mascots to mortality, it's massive.
So what is it with our brains? Why do they grab onto these anxieties and just not let go? Well, fear is a survival tool. It's baked into our evolution. But in our world today, it can get tripped by everything from a social media post to the 24/7 news cycle. But here's the good news. We don't have to be run by it. We can get a handle on it. So let's open up our toolkit and start with a tool from the world of science.
Okay, our first tool. This is a very structured, almost clinical approach that's used in therapy all the time. I want you to think of it like building a ladder for yourself, one that's designed to help you climb out of a specific fear, one little rung at a time. It's systematic, it's controlled, and it's something called an exposure hierarchy. So, the big idea here is actually pretty simple. You can't just dive headfirst into the deep end when you're terrified of water, right? An exposure hierarchy is basically a personalized roadmap that lets you walk in from the shallow end. You literally list out everything related to your fear, and then you put it in order, from the, that's a little scary stuff to the absolutely terrifying stuff. This whole process is the backbone of what's known as exposure therapy, and it's a proven way to tackle phobias.
So how do you actually build one of these? It's really just 4 steps. First, you get super specific about what you're afraid of. Second, you just brainstorm. List out every possible scenario you can think of that's connected to that fear. Third, and this is the magic right here, you give each thing on your list a score. Therapists call it the Subjective Units of Distress Scale, or SUDS for short. It's just a 0 to 100 rating of how much anxiety it gives you. 0 is totally chill, 100 is peak panic attack. That rating system turns a messy list into a strategic ladder. And finally, you start at the very bottom with the lowest score, and you begin the work of facing it.
Let's make this real with the super common fear, public speaking. This example shows you exactly how it works. Just thinking about a topic for a presentation, okay, maybe that's a 20 on the distress scale. Practicing it by yourself in your room, that might be a 40. Doing it in front of a trusted friend, now we're up to a 60. And then the main event, actually giving the presentation, that's way up there at a 95. See how it works? You start by conquering the 20, then you move to the 40, and you slowly build the confidence and the strength to eventually face that 95.
Okay, so that was the scientist tool. It's external, it's action-based. But what about the fears you can't really put on a ladder? Those fears that are tied to outside events. For that, we're going to leave the lab and travel back to the ancient world with this killer reminder from a Roman emperor.
Our second tool comes from Stoicism. It's an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy that's having a huge comeback right now, and for good reason. I mean, in a world that feels so chaotic, it's basically a practical training manual for your brain. And let's get one thing straight. This isn't about being a robot and suppressing your feelings. Not at all. It's about figuring out what you can control versus what you can't, and finding incredible power in that difference.
And this is the absolute heart of it. It's called the dichotomy of control. On the left, you've got your domain, your thoughts, your actions, your attitude, how you respond to things. That's your turf. On the right, literally everything else. The weather, what other people do, the past, the future. The Stoics argued that pretty much all our anxiety comes from wasting our energy worrying about the stuff in that right-hand column. So here's the actual practice. The moment you feel that anxiety creeping in, you ask yourself, is this thing I'm worrying about in my control or out of my control? If it's out of your control, you consciously shift your focus back to the things you can control, your thoughts about it, your response to it. It sounds simple, but it's a profoundly powerful mental habit to build. The philosopher Epictetus, a man who was born a slave and became this incredible teacher, he just nailed it with his quote. The real power isn't in trying to change the event itself. The power is in choosing your reaction to the event. That right there is the philosopher's tool.
So we've got a tool for specific phobias and a tool for our general mindset. But what about that fear of feeling totally alone with all this anxiety? For our third tool, we're going to circle right back to where we started, the simple and incredibly powerful act of sharing.
You know how it is. We often think our fears make us seem weak or weird or broken, so we just bottle them up. But keeping them in the dark like that, it just gives the fear more power. When we actually voice it, when we share it, something kind of amazing happens. We build connection, we find understanding, and we realize, oh wow, I'm not the only one.
Remember the army wife from the beginning, terrified her husband would be redeployed? Well, check this out. Over 4,000 people liked, commented, or shared her post. Now that number, that's not just a social media metric. That's 4,253 people sending a massive signal that says we hear you, we get it, you are not alone in this. And that validation, it's an incredibly powerful thing.
And this really says it all, doesn't it? Sharing our fears doesn't always magically make them vanish, but what it does do is lighten the load. It builds a bridge between you and other people, and that connection can make all the difference. That's the community tool in our toolkit.
All right, so we've packed 3 very different but very powerful tools into our mental toolkit: the scientist ladder, the philosopher's circle, and the power of community. The trick now is knowing which tool to pull out for which job.
Let's just lay it all out. You've got a specific phobia, like a fear of spiders or flying. The scientist's ladder is your go-to. Are you stressing about things you absolutely can't change, like the economy or politics? That's when you pull out the philosopher's tool to get a grip on your own mind. And when you're just feeling overwhelmed and isolated by it all, the community tool is there to remind you that you're not in this alone.
And look, the biggest takeaway here is that these aren't just cool ideas to think about, they are active, practical strategies. You can literally start building an exposure hierarchy today. You can start practicing the dichotomy of control on your next worry. You can reach out to a friend right now. These are tools for doing.
And that brings us to the final question. You know, facing our fears isn't really about becoming fearless. It's about becoming more courageous. It's about having the right tools when you need them. So take a second and think about it. Which one of these tools are you going to add to your own toolkit first?